you please be seated? Well, good morning and welcome to the Rose Chapel here at Palmdale. We are gathered here together as the family and friends of Anthony Mackintosh, known affectionately and loved by all of you as Tony. We gather here to mourn his death, but we gather here to celebrate his life. And we gather here to express our sense of loss and sadness at his death, but at the same time we gather here in thanksgiving for Tony's 73 years of life and love. And so in this, the wake of death, we gather in celebration of life, and we take this opportunity to acknowledge before each other as Tony's family and friends, his nearest and dearest, the time that we've enjoyed with him and the time that he has enjoyed with us. As we lay to rest his mortal body this day, we do so through this service of remembrance and the tribute that we will pay him through eulogy, through song, through prayer, and through our own personal remembrances. Occasions like this are fraught with mixed emotion, are they not? Sadness and tears alongside celebration and thanksgiving. And this juxtaposition is keenly felt by none other than Tony's nearest and dearest, his family. And I extend to you, Sally, to sons Charles and James, and your family, my sympathy and prayers at this time. We are confronted by death, which is an all too painful reality of life. And we're confronted by the inevitability that we, like Tony, must make the same journey that he makes at this time one day ourselves. And so today presents us with an opportunity not only to celebrate and give thanks for Tony's life and his achievements, but perhaps also to allow this opportunity to be an occasion for us to reflect on our own life and achievements as well. As we prepare to commend Tony to God's eternal keeping, we do so in a spirit of thanksgiving, mindful of the many and various ways that he has served his family, his community, and indeed society at large. The poet Robert Fulghum said, "I believe that imagination is stronger than knowledge. Myth is more potent than history. Dreams are more powerful than facts. Hope always triumphs over experience. Laughter is the cure for grief. Love is stronger than death." Love is stronger than death. Nothing can diminish your love for Tony, nor his love for you. Death does not have the final word on that aspect of life. And that is a way that we can be very grateful. Friends, we have a series of eulogies today for this service for Tony, the first of which is to be presented by Peter de Bern. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you for that mention that humour banishes grief. It's good, yeah. Hello, how are you? It's my privilege actually to present you with a part of Mac's eulogy. This will be anecdotal. I've also been asked to talk about religion. English is a fluid language. Words can change meaning over the passage of time. It's possible religion is one of these words. I prefer to use spiritual. We'll come back to this at the end. Now, Mac, and I use the present tense, is a kind, caring, trustworthy, and gentle man. All the most admirable traits which he has passed on in the full measure to his sons, Charles and James. I've known Mac over half a century, in fact, almost 6 decades. I met him first in our first year of apprenticeship at the Royal Aircraft Establishment in Farnborough in England. He chose tool and instrument making. He was last employed in the mining industry, heavy engineering. A very adaptable and very capable man. He used to announce his height as 5 foot 17.5 inches. He tipped the scales at about 10 stone. Slim. He was all legs, topped by a head, which earned him the nickname Split Pin. In those days, he had the ability to place both legs behind his neck, but was unable to undo himself from this position without help. He demonstrated this once at mealtime in the apprentices' dining room. We ignored his pleas for assistance, and whilst he sat on the floor, spitting and fuming, we ate his lunch. He's a quick learner. He only ever did that once. Now, I'm sure that the statute of limitations has passed, so I'll share with you that Tony also masterminded the lifting of the hostel manager's motorcar onto the canteen roof. When you meet Mac, he might say to you, "G'day, how are you?" And you might say, "I'm well." That's good. Let's get on to something really important now. That's enough about you. Let's talk about me. Nobody, I was going to ignore, no, won't do that. On his visits to the family home in Crowthorne in England, he used to drive my mum batty. He would sit in the armchair next to the fire, put his feet on the mantelpiece, and only somebody of his height could do that, yeah. He came with the family to the church, Roman Catholic. In those days we used Latin, with chant responses from the congregation. I was delighted to hear Mac join in. Then I heard the words he was using. "I can play dominoes better than you can." Either my father chose to ignore it or didn't hear. Now, I last saw him at Gosford Hospital, and one of his first comments to me was, "Oh, I must look awful." I was able to reassure him that I've seen him looking worse, coming out of the Kirribilli Hotel on a Friday night, or after the genteel tasting of Inner Circle overproof rum at Casey's home in Canberra. Now, I'm really challenged by the thought that I'll not see Mac again in heaven. 6 decades of his company is just not enough. I want eternity with him. It is my prayer that he has accepted Jesus as his saviour, the passport into heaven. Christ has already done the hard yards. He carried our sins with him to the cross and took the penalty which we deserved, so that we could be in God's presence pure and blameless and acceptable to him. All that's required of us, and it's a one-on-one thing, just you and Christ, is to swallow pride, to realise that there's no other way we can achieve this entry into heaven on our own, and say, "Yes, please, Jesus, I want to take some of your offer. Take your offer and become one of your adopted brothers and sisters." I'll see you in heaven, Tony. Not yet, not yet, not yet. I love you, Mac, as does Jesus.
Thank you, Peter. We now hear from Tim Samuels.
Well, good morning. My name is Tim, and I'm a friend of Tony Mackintosh. Unlike Peter, my friendship with Tony was only extended over the last 25 years. I've not had the privilege of knowing Tony in his early years. I've always referred to Tony as Tosh. I first met Tosh in 1991. At that time, I owned a news agency in Sharmhaven. Tosh was a regular customer and called in each morning to pick up his paper, which was put aside for him. Tosh was working in the mines at that time. We would write Tony's name on the top of the paper, and as time progressed, we got to know each other. We had a bit of fun with his paper and also his name. What started off simply as Tosh progressed to Tony Tosh, Tosh Mac and Tony, and eventually ended up Tushman McToshik. Tosh took some delight in seeing how his name was presented. He'd have a laugh, but he gave me that "you are a complete idiot" expression as he left the shop. We visited each other's, we have visited several family gatherings, both at his place and at mine. And on one occasion we attended an opening restaurant together with other friends. I've over the past 25 years had the opportunity of seeing his two boys, Charles and James, grow into men, both with undeniable traits Tony has instilled in them. Charles, being the older, was introduced to me as Charles, and I've always referred to him as Charles. James, on the other hand, being much younger, was introduced to me as Jimmy Jam. It might be noted that I no longer refer to James as Jimmy Jam. There was a significant lapse in our friendship when my wife and I moved away to another area to pursue other business interests. About 4 years ago, our friendship was resumed when I happened to bump into Tosh while shopping. I was agog at Tony's appearance. He was in the throes of battling his first bout of cancer. Nonetheless, Tosh always put on a brave face, and we delighted in each other's company, over a coffee, at Macca's of course, or the occasional beer and red wine. Tosh always insisted that this dreaded disease was not going to change his lifestyle. Such was the nature and his fighting spirit. Tosh delighted in relating his experience as a young man in the Merchant Navy, and he also tried to explain to me the fundamental workings of longwall mining. I did my best to try and understand the intricacies of the industry, but quite frankly, I had little understanding of what he was talking about. I mean, how hard can it be to dig a hole and extract coal, even if the hole's 2 k's underground? Towards the end, Tosh was confined to hospital. His body was breaking down in several areas with cancer raging through and later complications with his heart. When visiting him at the hospital, I had to inquire as to whether he was in a surgical ward, coronary ward, ITC ward, or a cancer ward. It was his last wish that he be returned home to sit in his chair. Tosh was aware of his situation. He knew that his time was near, and thankfully his last request was granted, and he returned home. He was in the comfort zone with people who cared for him, and when his time came, only a few days later, he passed in comfort. Now, I haven't referred to Sally. All through this painful experience, Sally was there with Tosh. Not for Tosh, but with him. She experienced the highs when things seemed to be improving, and she was there when things were lower. She was Tosh's rock, constant support, disregarding her own pain. You see, Sally also has suffering of her own ailments. So now Tosh has passed on. He's left me with a great legacy. My name is Tim. I remain a friend of Tony.
We're now going to hear from Tony's sons, Charles and James.
A week ago today, the world lost a great man, Tony Mackintosh, or Mac to his friends. Dad was a larger-than-life, unique presence in this world. He was loved by all that met him. Dad grew up without a normal home life. He fended for himself from a very young age and had very few people in his life to teach him how to be a good husband and be a good dad. Despite this, Dad became a loving husband, an amazing dad, and has managed to always provide for us, even when times were tough. We will all be eternally grateful. Dad was an old romantic. He treated Mum like his queen. He always opened the car door for her and never had to be reminded to wash up the dishes. He never forgot to get Mum flowers on all those special occasions. He showed us how to treat your partner, and the proof was in the pudding with a strong 45-year marriage. Dad was a worker, even when not at work. Rarely did we see him sit down unless it was with a crossword, a glass of red wine, some biscuits and cheese. He loved his job and he enjoyed working with a bunch of guys that all looked out for each other, something he missed terribly most when he had to give the work up. He was very house proud and always loved a visit from someone or a chat with anyone who would listen. We often joked about which bloody neighbour he was talking to now. Growing up, some of my favourite memories of Dad were quoting the characters from his loved Goon show, building the train set in the garage, or him driving me to school, often in his Jag, driving right through the gates at school and into the quadrangle where everybody else was, just to drop me off. Not sure if it was to embarrass me or to show off his beloved car, maybe a little bit of both. As an adult, Dad continued to guide me and offer an ear whenever it was needed. He was always there for me. And he was always there on the day I needed to move house as well, which seemed to be an event that happened regularly. He was so happy to see his family grow, and with the birth of my daughter, I saw a side of Dad that was even more loving and proud. I didn't know that was possible. We're all going to miss your bone-crunching hugs, your smile when we walk through the door, and your positive outlook on nearly everything. I only hope you know how much you were loved and how much you'll be missed by your entire family.
My first memories of Dad were of his big black beard and his Tui shirt. Also snuggling into his massive warm work jacket when we went fishing, or sitting on the front veranda watching the thunderstorms. Something we both loved. Mum not so much. She would hide inside. We both always had a new joke for each other, laughed and played silly buggers together, and that's the way it always was, right up until his last days. I know he was in pain. I know he feared what was going to happen next, but he never let it show. He was the strongest man I know. Throughout my life, Dad was such a positive person. He was always there to listen, cheer me on, and give me a hug when I needed one. Dad brought me my first car and my first bottle of bourbon. He helped me when times were tough, and he was my best friend. Thank you, Daddy-O. I'm so proud to be called your son. He was always an influence on every decision I will make in my life, because one day I hope to be just like him. Hopefully I've made him proud to be a dad. Farewell, Dad. Farewell, husband, grandpa and friend. We'll always love, miss and cherish you. Farewell.
Thank you, Charles and James. A final tribute which I'm going to read out on behalf of Laurie Byrne. My tribute to Tony Mackintosh, Mac. I first got to know Mac through our mutual friend Peter de Bern, who I had known since school days. They were into crashing and repairing motorbikes and cars, chasing girls, drinking beer, and all the usual fun things that teenagers do. Mac was always an outstanding character in many ways, not just because he was tall, but because he had so much energy and zest for life and had an infectious way of getting us all into and out of so much trouble. He had a magnetic personality and sense of humour that could make him the centre of attention anywhere, with that big booming voice and wicked sense of the ridiculous that created so many masterful pranks. When I left home in my early 20s, I moved into an old shared cottage with Mac and some other boys and girls. It had been a pub in the 18th and 19th century called the Old Crown and had a huge iron stove in the kitchen for cooking and heating and an outside toilet in the garden in the back of the coal shed. What a magical couple of years that was on first leaving home. We had one particular party that Mac mainly organised that went on for 2 days and was gatecrashed by members of the rock group The Who. This was in about 1965 when they were described in the local newspaper as an up-and-coming band that played locally and had just released their first record that was doing well in the charts. They were sharing another cottage just a half mile away in Hurst, near Reading, in England. I remember many other great times with the gang and Mac, and when he and Sally were married, I had the honour of being the best man, and still have the photos. And when they left for Australia, it was England's loss and Australia's gain. It was great to catch up in the 90s when he and Sally put me and my wife up for a visit and met their boys. And I had always hoped to meet up again. It is sad that we all have to move on eventually, but real friendships last forever. Time and distance make no difference to that. Mac always had been a real friend, a good friend. Goodbye, Mac. Goodbye, good friend. From Laurie Byrne. We're now going to have some background music, and I'm going to invite firstly Mac's family to come forward and place a rose on the coffin.
You remember me when the west wind moves among the fields of barley. You can tell the sun in his jealous sky when we walked in fields of gold. So she took her love for to gaze a while among